push it. It's on. Okay. So, first of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to my hosts, starting with Professor Peter Weil, who visited me at Nanyang Technological University some months ago, and I was so enthusiastic about coming over to Africa for the first time in my life that I really hope the first encounters, like between humans and ETs, for instance, can be very challenging, and I hope it can be very, very productive also. Also thanks to Willem Hendrik Haspen. So, you know, Vlaams and the classic Netherlands, ABN, are not exactly the same, but I hope I could pronounce it properly, who is not only a very famous neuroscientist, but also a very enthusiastic man. And I'm very thankful that Willem Hendrik was so nice to me to invite me to this newly established institute. And of course, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Professor André Swart and the University of Johannesburg. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I see here old friends, Paul Mangap, for instance, from the other university, with whom we have been at the Karolinska together for more than 3 years. And. Life is short, but the older you are, the more you realize somehow these things come together at the end. Like a picture, a mosaic picture, the small bits and pieces of the mosaic come together, and you are not wondering anymore about any encounter. When you meet people, and suddenly we realize we have at least 20, if not 100, common friends, or we have spent years in the same place, and I would not wonder if I would stay with you for a bit longer and realize maybe all of you have something common with me. So tonight, or today, this afternoon, I would like to talk about something which was not planned earlier. I tell you why. When I got the invitation for Peter, I was told the topic is why the brain matters, and this is really an interesting topic. And those who work in, for instance, clinical neuroscience, they would like to say the following. Well, Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases are major problems worldwide, so we have to talk about this. Others are saying different stories. In Singapore, this is a very classic story now. We have to optimize the learning capacity of the population. So we have to focus on learning neuroscience. This is now the great topic in Singapore. How to teach from age 2 onwards, people in the best, most optimal way to have an optimal level of knowledge, primary skills, not really knowledge, I would say, to have high performance and boost the economy. But I was also told probably I should talk about the brain-mind problem, which is one of my favorite topics. So I started to think about the brain-mind problem. And of course, I've been talking about the brain-mind problem so many times. I have my standard slides, the various different models, philosophical and all other newer and newer ideas about the brain-mind problem. And of course, we can talk about it for hours. Even we can give a whole colloquium, a whole seminar serious about the brain-mind problem, how this fantastic thing, the mind, is somehow emerging from the background, the nature, which you didn't realize before, and somehow something is there. So I thought we should talk about it. But life is interesting. Just a year ago in Singapore, I befriended one of the natives of Johannesburg, who was born approximately 20 kilometers away from here. He is called Sidney Brenner. Sidney is 89 years old, and according to many, he was one of the most influential, if not the most influential biologists of the 20th century. He's a Nobel laureate. He's the guy who discovered the triplets. He's the guy who described for the first time the first complete genome, the genome of the C. elegans. And you can name how many absolutely important discoveries were made by Sidney Brenner. So Sidney is actually my best friend in Singapore. And I regularly sit down with Sidney, and together with him, who is now 89, almost 90-year-old, he will be 90 in January, we had a symposium, a workshop a few weeks ago in Singapore with some major scientists, including Lord Martin Rees, the Royal Astronomer from Cambridge, Urs Satmari, the most famous evolutionary biologist, Terry Sejnowski, the founder of cognitive neuroscience. So, and we were thinking about the grand challenges of science in the 21st century. And the consensus at the end of the symposium was quite clear. The greatest challenge for the 21st century is the human brain, the human mind. We still don't understand what it is. So if something is a great challenge, the human mind, and what is underlying the human brain are the main challenges, but in a larger context. And I would like to call your attention in this short presentation. I have only 160 slides, but I will not show all of them to you, about this great challenge, what it is and why it is so important in a larger context. Let's start with numbers. Numbers. You see the starry sky, you see the stars, a small fraction, which we can see with sheer eyes. And we know that approximately, and we know that because we have rather good telescopes now, the Hubble telescope, the Arecibo telescope, and so on, that approximately there are 10 to the 11th, 10 to the 12th stars in a galaxy. And there are approximately 10 to the 11th, 10 to the 12th galaxies in our universe within the so-called event horizon. So altogether, the conservative estimate is that at least 10 to the 22nd or 10 to the 24th stars are in our universe. And stars are the elementary bodies in this universe when we talk about visible matter. We don't talk about dark matter. We don't talk about invisible matter, no, visible matter. How about the brain? Surprisingly, and there are now better and better estimates. I took the latest estimate from the famous Danish neuroscientist and stereologist Penke Pakkenberg's paper. That's the best estimate right now. Approximately 10 to the 11th, so 8.6 times 10 to the 10th neurons are in a brain. Almost the same number as number of stars in a galaxy. And we have to think about not only one single brain. We always have to think about the brain or brains of humankind, because we are never alone. We are always in a context, a larger context. So how many people have lived on Earth? So I took the precise estimate of the World Health Organization. They counted, I don't know how, that approximately 10 to the 11th people have lived on Earth until today. So if we add together these two figures, more precisely multiply, the total number of neurons in humankind in history until today is approximately the same as the number of stars in the universe. And if you go for the conservative estimate, it's approximately the same. If you say, okay, but there are probably 100 times more stars, okay, but within 3,000 years, only 10 generations, we will have this number. It's a surprise. So we have approximately the same neurons in the history of humankind as stars in the universe, which shows something mutually interesting. Brains are very complicated things because they have so many units that you can only describe it with numbers which remind you the almost infiniteness or the fantastic largeness of the universe, and vice versa. The universe somehow comparable with the brain. However, numbers are not enough. We have to think about complexity. Complexity in two different domains, partly spatial or structural complexity. The structures which form the brain are very complex, and Ramón y Cajal, Santiago Ramón y Cajal, the greatest pioneer of human neuroanatomy, at the end of the last century described in great detail how the neurons are structured, and these structures are different slightly in different parts of the human brain. But he didn't describe at that time, over 100 years ago, the so-called elementary building blocks of these neurons. It was realized much later by this gentleman, Vernon Moncastle, who studied the somatosensory and motor cortices and realized that these neurons are somehow structured in columns, so-called cortical columns. And based on this discovery and his own discoveries, my mentor, János Szentagotai, described in great detail the structure of these so-called cortical columns, which he called at that time modules. That is to say approximately 300,000 cells. Let them be excitatory, inhibitory interneurons, and so on and so on, form a building block. And the human brain is built up by millions of these cortical modules. And we know that the connections between these cortical modules are connected by millions of fibers. The new connectome analysis of the human brain shows that between the millions of these building blocks, there are millions of pathways which connect them and create a very refined structural complexity. But that's not enough. There is also temporal complexity in the human brain. That is to say, if we look at this sort of EEG measurement or MEG measurement, we can realize that the human brain is also complex with regard to temporal pattern generation. So we deal with a very complex system. But what is this system? What is indeed the human brain? Are there definitions what it is? Well, if you read the literature, there are different definitions. Of course, I have read at least a dozen interesting and intriguing definitions, challenging definitions. But the best definition I have heard until today was given by my good old friend Jean-Pierre Changeux, the famous French neuroscientist, who in his famous book, sold in hundreds, if not millions of copies worldwide, L'homme neuronal, the neuronal man, he describes the human brain as the only epistemological machine in the universe, the only known epistemological machine. What does this mean? According to Jean-Pierre, this is the only construction, the only machine, the only device in the universe which can translate the external reality into an internal reality faithfully. So it's a kind of a translator. The external reality is transformed into an internal reality, a model of the external reality in a rather faithful way. And we know from classical philosophical studies, epistemological studies, that knowledge is justified through belief. So there must be a mechanism which justifies the usefulness of this transformation and the faithfulness of this transformation made by the human brain. There is, though, another line in this field, in this area. And this line is related to some philosophical, cosmological, let's call it perspiration, rumination. The universe is approximately 13.6 billion years old. And of course, starting with the Big Bang, we can realize, and the cosmologists, how the stars, the galaxies developed from the galaxies, the different planetary systems, and so on and so on and so on. And on Earth, life developed and the brain developed. So there must be some intricate relationship between our brain and this whole process and this whole underlying system. And of course, there are some very fantastic descriptions, even philosophical, even religious descriptions of this intricate relationship. But the best and most scientific in our Western scientific concept or description of the things is given by this gentleman called Eugene Wigner, one of the founders of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, a Nobel laureate. He got the Nobel Prize in the 60s for his classic descriptions of quantum mechanics. By the way, he was born in Budapest, just like me, who gave a very interesting and, of course, with equations, very detailed scientific description, in which he said basically there must be a relationship between the basic constituents of our universe, of the physical laws and consciousness. Otherwise, you cannot not only describe quantum mechanics, but quantum mechanics cannot exist, the basic elementary physical principle. And Eugene Wigner has given, and I recommend you to read his basic papers about it, some very, very deep mathematical analysis of this thing. So this is basically the best explanation of the line which says somehow the human brain, the human mind, is there in order to observe the universe. It's a self-observing universe principle. During this development, billions of years of development, the human brain is there in order to be able to realize what goes on here. And this is the classical sort of pictogram of the whole thing. The universe somehow develops this entity, the human brain, which can do some insight, which can understand to some extent what goes on. Now, there are, of course, as I told you, I have read at least a dozen, if not more, similar ideas. But while preparing for my lecture, I asked my good friend Sidney Brenner, so Sidney, in your opinion, what is the human brain? And Sidney told me, well, I think it's similar to the kidney. A kidney which is excreting water, I mean urine, and sort of secreting many things like proteins and so on. So the human brain is excreting words and secretes thoughts. So it's just like an endocrine organ. But what is even more interesting with it, it can see the future. And this is some very, very interesting aspect, because we don't know of any other system in the universe which can foresee the future. So let me just interpret what he meant by this sort of secret thoughts concept. Look, this is a zebrafish. And when you look with some modern technologies, optogenetic technologies, at the brain of the zebrafish. It's a zebrafish larvae. It doesn't move. It sticks with some needles to the microscope table. And you can visualize the internal activity of its nervous system. You see that this larvae is not looking at anything. It's not hearing anything. It's not having any sensory input. Still produces some very interesting, very intricate patterns of activity. Similarly to that, our brain is capable of generating internally without any sensory input, in sensory deprivation conditions, internal patterns. So we can create, we can create thoughts internally. So this is something unique. Now, if I add together these things, so I can say, and this is a very peculiar sort of package. The human brain is something where an intimate connection between consciousness and the universe takes place. The human brain is a kind of a self-observer phenomenon in the universe. It's an epistemological machine which can translate external reality into a model and, in the other way around, project the model into the universe. It can generate thoughts, and it can see the future. So somehow, it gives the impression that the human brain is a kind of a sentinel of our universe. It sounds a bit philosophical, but definitely you have to come to this conclusion. And if it is so, we must admit, and we must accept that the human brain must have a unique place in the universe. It's not just another celestial body. It's not just yet another physical phenomenon. It's something unique. But if it is so, and since we are the carriers of this fantastic human brain, we humans, we have duties, cosmic or universal duties, including the following. We should understand ourselves, our brain, our mind, and our role in the universe in this larger context. And we should also understand the universe. And last but not least, we should also understand other thinking systems, other brains, other minds, if they exist. So here comes the grand challenge, which we discuss, which I usually discuss with my friends like Sidney Brenner and others. How about if we are not alone? We have to develop a strategy. How to communicate with these other possible minds, other thinking systems. This is an important thing. But, and here comes, but how? How about if we are alone? We are the only thinking system in the universe. In either case, we have unique responsibilities. So let's explore these things, and let's explore the concept that we have a limited time to explore all these things. So we have limited individual lifetimes, and most probably we have limited lifetime of our brain, the Homo sapiens brain, in the history of the universe. So we have responsibilities. We have to come back to the classic Greek principle, gnotise auton, know thyself. Start to learn who you are. We have to think about, in this context, the future of the post-human brain era, when the universe will probably have no human brains. How about the future of thinking? And how about the communication possibilities with other thinking beings? So these are just questions, but let me just carefully try to explore some of these questions within the larger context of neurobiology and biology in general, not mentioning some physical and cosmological background information. So I mentioned that we have a very important task because our precious time is probably limited. And there are, unfortunately, some rationales to warn us about our finite time as Homo sapiens. You know probably that there is a so-called background extinction rate in biology. On the average, 5 species, biological species, disappear every year, and this is a normal biological phenomenon called the background extinction rate. Thanks to, or more precisely, due to human interventions, not thanks to. This is topped up by 1,000, if not 10,000 times higher artificial extinction rate due to human activities in the world. Which means that by 2050, according to biologists who follow carefully these trends, half of the species in our biological kingdom will be extinct. This is a frightening reality. Within 34 years, half of the biological species present now on Earth will be extinct. What happens to the most precious biological species, us? If we follow this trend and we don't do something against it, we, as the most frightened, most endangered biological species, will also be extinct. This is a very sad reality. But I'm not a biologist, I'm a neurobiologist. But all my very serious biological friends claim that's a possibility, a serious possibility. So in this context, our time is running out. So we have to learn how our brain works, what are the biological underpinnings of these mechanisms, which can produce thoughts, which can produce personality, which can produce temperament. So our personality, our cognitive faculties, the human mind. But we also have to look for some other options if we have so limited time, whether we are alone or not. This is a kind of a duty, because if we are alone, okay, we are the only observers of this universe. If we are not alone, we should be able to somehow discuss these things with them and try to understand what they say, how we can do something in common. So the SETI program worldwide, since the late 50s, is aiming at this question, whether there are other intelligent beings in the universe. So let me open here a small, say, between brackets, a small chapter about the possibility of having other life forms, more precisely, other intelligent life forms in the universe. Carl Sagan, very famous physicist in the 50s, created his famous statement. Using the current radio astronomical technologies, it is possible for us to receive signals from civilizations no more advanced than we are now, over a distance of at least many thousands of light years. And he made the calculation that we have a capacity to receive signals of this energy, within this energy range. So in order to produce signals, say, 1,000 light years away from our Earth, the emitter should have this capacity, this energy emitting capacity, which is possible with our civilization's technological tools, like the famous Arecibo Observatory Planetary Radar transmitter can produce 10 to the 13th watt energy continuously. So if we can produce it, and they are at the same level as we are, they will be able to produce it, and we will be able to communicate. So the conclusion of the Sagan statement is, if a civilization is at our developmental technical level and uses our presently available technologies, it will be able to send us signals, send signals in general, and send us signals. And we should be able to detect it. This search has been going on for over 60 years now. Now, but during the past 60 years, nothing has come out of it. So Fermi, the famous physicist, after a couple of years, it was already long ago, almost 50 years ago, declared there is an apparent contradiction between the high estimates of the probability of existence of extraterrestrial civilizations, such as in the Drake equation, I will show it immediately, and the lack of evidence for such civilizations. And Fermi's famous question is the following: where is everybody? Where is everybody? Are we alone? So Drake, a physicist, formulated this possibility formula, and I don't want to go through it. Physicists, cosmologists nowadays debate it very carefully. I've just read this week, or last week actually, the most recent results of the SETI Institute, claiming that in each galaxy there can be approximately 200 to 300 million exoplanets similar to our Earth, and possible cradles of life. So the number, if you multiply it by the number of the galaxies, 10 to the 11th, 10 to the 12th, is extremely high. And still, we don't hear of anything from any other planet. Though in May this year, there was a very interesting observation. The SETI, what is this? Whatever it is, receiver claimed in Chukland that they have found a very interesting signal from Alpha Centauri, coming from 6.3 million, 95 light years away from an old star. So there must be something over there. This has been in the news for at least 3 months, until it became evident just 2 weeks ago that it was an artifact through to a satellite just appearing above this dish and giving an artifact signal. So up until now, nobody sent any message to us from the universe. Of course, there are speculations. If the universe is teeming with aliens, where is everybody? And of course, there are different possibilities. They probably lived a bit earlier than we do now, or they will live maybe a bit later than our human species can live. So there are no overlaps between their signal sending and our signal receiving, or vice versa, our signal sending and their receiving. Or they are not interested in us. We are just little small termites, ants, compared to their civilization. So there are many possible interpretations in these 75 different solutions have been described by physicists. But what is interesting, and that's my conclusion, if this is also the human brain, whether or not we consider other alien beings, other alien brains or not, the human brain is unique and very precious. So we should understand it better. The brain matters. And that's why I like the title of this talk. It's a unique, very precious being in the universe. But then come a few philosophical questions here. Can we really understand the human brain and consequently the human mind? It sounds very simple. Biologists can put little electrodes here and there, record activities here and there in the brain. So we can probably understand everything. Oh. There are some challenges and obstacles ahead of us. And strangely enough, there are tens of thousands of neuroscientists around the world who just don't even consider these possibilities. Fortunately, some serious guys, not always neuroscientists, sometimes mathematicians, sometimes philosophers, sometimes even writers, have come to the conclusion we should be more careful with all these things. Like Kurt Gödel, the very famous mathematician in the beginning, who lived in the beginning of the last century and established his very famous theorem, the Girdle Theorem. In short, the conclusion is if you have a closed system, a closed formal system, and the human being can be regarded as a closed formal system. But let's use another example, language. Language is a closed formal system, where each sentence, each word, each syntax should have a very closed relationship with the others, otherwise it would have no meaning. But if you want to describe a language, you cannot describe it from within the system, because the system cannot describe itself as an outsider, as an observer. So, a closed formal system mathematically cannot describe itself. And the major conclusion, very widely accepted by serious neuroscientists and philosophers of the Girdle Theorem is the human brain cannot describe the human brain. This is something which we have to overcome somehow. There are also other challenges, like philosophical challenges. And here the great issue is, if there are philosophers in this room, is the qualia, the question of qualia. What are the qualia? Schrödinger, the physicist, described already in terms, but I don't want to go into this. Let me just put to have the conclusion, to refer to Daniel Dennett's famous book, Consciousness Explained, in which he explains what qualia is, an unfamiliar term for something that could not be more familiar to each of us, the ways things seem to us. So we have subjective experience. And green or beige or whatever color I see here in this room is something which has a meaning for me because it comes through my senses. It's translated into some perceptual concept in my brain, but I cannot be sure that this concept, perceptual concept, is the same in your brain, your brain, your brain, and your brain. There are no objective measures, no objective ways to exchange this information between different brains. So the qualia are subjective. Human conscious experience is subjective and cannot be explained in objective terms. This is a major, major issue which should be overcome. Then there is something very new in this field. Many, many new scientific projects would like to obtain big data. We will collect information from 7 billion people around the world, and we will know what it is. Ops, ops, ops. There is a very serious theoretical issue behind big data collection and big data analysis. And this whole theory was established by this very famous writer, Jorge Luis Borges, world famous Argentinian, but he lived in Venezuela or vice versa. who formulated the famous Borges paradigm in one of his essays. The essay goes like that. A king is interested in describing his whole empire. So he asks his cartographers to create a very precise map of his country. So the cartographers come and create a map like an A4 sheet of paper. But the king is not happy with that. It's not precise. Make a bigger one. So they create a much bigger one, like a table. But the king is not happy. It's not precise. Make a bigger one. So they make a much bigger one like this room. But the king is not happy. So finally, the cartographers make a map which is as big as his country. And everything covers everything. That is to say, the model and the reality are overlapping. Oops. So it shows something. If you really want to describe the human brain, you should probably, 5 minutes? You should probably have a big, big, big brain created in machines. And this is what some of the projects, like the Human Brain Project, the Blue Brain Project, and then what came out of it, the Human Brain Project, aims at. But without a proper theory, without a proper model, we will not be able to describe the human brain. Anyway, one more challenge I would like to share with you. Downward causation. What is all this? You are driving a car, and there is a red light. Red light. What is this? It's just a symbol. But you brake, the brake works, the car stops. So you stop the car of 1,000 kilo with just some very interesting mechanism. A symbol could stop a heavy object. How comes? Can a symbol, through our brain, influence a physical reality? Can something at the level of symbol influence your brain mechanisms, which can then give instruction to stop something? Can our brain give instructions to our body? A thought, move the leg, or move even cars, vehicles, and so on. This is an interesting issue, and basically the whole issue was raised by serious neuroscientists, formulated first Roger Sperry and Donald Campbell, and the concept is going on further with others, philosophers like our Popper participated, John Eccles, and so on, my mentor János Szentagotai, who formulated in great detail the big question as a neurobiological theory, downward causation or backward causation. Can the brain, the mind, create physical effects? And this is something which we have to deal with. And these are only some of these great obstacles or challenges if we want to make a general brain theory. Now, this was only, say, 20% or 15% of my presentation, but due to shortage of time and in interest of time, I don't want to go on further. We can, of course, discuss it later today. Let me just finalize in the last 2 minutes my presentation with something in which I think we can do something together between your university and GEOS. I've developed many slides, but let's discuss it later today. I focus only on one little thing. If you would like to understand if there are other thinking beings in the universe, how they think, we can create, of course, theories how to communicate with other minds, how to read other thinking systems, thoughts. But the big question is, do we really have to work with theories how we humans can communicate between ETs, aliens, other thinking systems, if they are at all? Why don't we become a bit more realistic and try to think it over? Are there other possibilities here on our everyday earthly conditions to study some minor changes between brains and brains of Homo sapiens? So I read a couple of years ago about the hobbits, Homo florensis, these little beings in an island close to Bali called Island of Florence, where archaeologists realized people were living there up until 9,000 years ago, and they were living together with the normal Homo sapiens population. They were interacting with each other, but these little guys, the hobbits, have only a 700 cubic centimeter big brain. And still, they had perfect societies, perfect communication, perfect way of thinking, according to recent knowledge. And it turned out, when I started to read the literature about it and talk to serious people who are searching this area, that there were not only one, a number of Homo sapiens subspecies which were living together at the same time during the history of mankind. They were even communicating with each other. The more intermarriages were possible between these different guys, like the Denisovo people, 1 to 2% of our genome comes from the Denisovo Homo sapiens subspecies, and another 1 to 2% comes from the Neanderthalians. So it means that we could not only communicate, not only talk to them, but we could have exchanged even genes with them. So we could have interactions. If it was the case in the past, can it be the case even in the present? So this is a Homo sapiens, this is a hobbit, a Homo florensis skull. And when I have discussed it with my friend in Singapore, Steve Lansing, a famous anthropologist, who is regularly going to Bali, to island of Florence, and meets these present-day hobbits, to my greatest surprise, he explained to me the following. And next time, I will come with a picture when he is shown with the local population. Steve is 180, and these guys are 1 meter tall. And they have a perfect society. They live close to the cave where these little hobbit skeletons were discovered. He says they are still alive, at least some offsprings. So when I asked Sydney about this whole thing, Sydney Brenner, who was born in Germiston, so next door, Sydney, I would like to search. I would like to make a detailed search of these guys, because they appear to be a kind of a sub-race, and it would be interesting to understand how their brain works, a 700 cubic centimeter brain works, to understand what are the basic mechanisms. He told me, wait a second, don't go to Florence. Come to the Kalahari and study the Bushmen. He studied when he was young, and he was living here in this town. He went down several times, or went up to the Kalahari and studied them. So, okay, Sydney, then I will study it. So I started to look around. And one of my colleagues at Nanyang Technological University, Stefan Schuster, a very famous biologist, who described for the first time the complete genome of these little guys here. And realized that here we are, and there they are. They have a very different genomic composition. They are Homo sapiens. 100,000 years ago, there were 4 times more Bushmen on Earth than any other Homo sapiens subspecies. So we decided that it would be great to go there and do some genetic studies, brain studies, psychophysical studies, and biota studies to understand how they are. And now I'm building up in Singapore a cutting-edge brain imaging center. This is a Siemens Prisma 3 Tesla machine, the most advanced with which you can make so-called human connectome studies to understand which part of the brain is connected to which part, and so on. So when just before Peter came, it was after you came, we put in this machine on the 7th floor of the building, 12,000 kilo in the air, so you can even, if you have a good crane, just put it up on the top of a building, 12,000 kilo. So if you can do that, why can't we put it in a track and go there and make the fantastic brain imaging studies in the Kalahari or wherever in the island of Florence and study their brain? So I went up to the head of Siemens MR. This guy, Christoph Zinder, is the CEO of Siemens MR. Christoph, he's a challenge seeker, very great guy, challenge seeker. I want to do it. He immediately gave his hand. We will do it. So I recruited also my good friend, Sven Pettersson from the Karolinska, and also from Singapore, with whom we just published a year ago, 2 years ago, a very interesting paper about the biota and its action on the brain. So what I would like to do, and this is something and sorry if the University of Johannesburg is missing from this, but with our university in Singapore, with GIAS, and the University of Johannesburg, if possible, a study, we see the sponsors, I see the scientific team, and I would be most happy to offer this fantastic project to GIAS, the University of Johannesburg. And of course, Willem Henrik, most welcome. And you guys, Paul, most welcome. If you can do that, I would be the happiest man on earth. So this was about it. At least 120 slides are still coming this afternoon. So thank you so much. Thank you for your attention.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.